Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen. I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering disabled individuals, their families, and the systems that support them for over 20 years. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, where I curate tools, share mindsets, and promote habits to help neurodiverse individuals thrive. Also, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a thing. In this video, I interview Danielle Christy of Inclusively Minded. Danielle is a licensed educational psychologist with over 15 years of experience in the public and non-public school settings. We do a deep dive into what inclusion is and the mindsets that promote inclusion in any setting. We also dip our toes into Danielle's work with anxious kiddos and how she uses cognitive behavioral therapy to free them of thinking traps. Danielle is all about strengths, choices, and growth. Please enjoy this interview with Danielle. Hi, Danielle. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Hello. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. Since you and I touched base even a couple weeks ago about this interview, I've been thinking so much about you and inclusion. And so I can't wait for us to dive in to what it means. But maybe before we do that, maybe you can tell us about yourself.
Yeah. I am first a mom, and I have two beautiful kids, a daughter that's 10. She just turned 10. And my son is 6.5, and he has Fragile X and autism, and is the joy of our lives. And so that's my first and most important job. But I also am a licensed educational psychologist. I just started a private practice a little over a year ago. Before that, I worked in public school settings for about 15 years. Did everything from non-public schools to self-contained programs. And then I finally landed at a charter school here in Sacramento and got to help them develop a full inclusion program. And so just fell into this profession. I, in undergrad, majored in psychology and French, and really by my senior year had no idea what I was going to do. And so my roommate said, "Hey, I'm going to apply to a school psychology program. Do you want to do that?" And I, before even having any idea what the job entailed, I just kind of jumped in and said, "Yeah, I need something to do." Gosh, what a good choice that was, with not a lot of information, because I luckily loved the job. So landed in the job and loved it. And as you probably know, when you're in this field, a population that comes up a lot is children with autism. And so I developed a love for that group of people and kids, and then found myself really needing some specialized training to serve them better. And so luckily, I live in Sacramento, and we're close to something called the UC Davis Mind Institute. Yeah. And this is a place that you may have heard of, specializes in neurodevelopmental disabilities. And so I did a fellowship there, learned so much about all kinds of neurodevelopmental disabilities, but especially autism. And then 6 years ago, I had my son, and had no idea that I was going to have such a personal connection. And I will say that honestly, all of the professional training and being in schools was great, but nothing's better than the 24/7, 365 days a year I get training with him. So
yeah, I mean, we were kind of joking, over email, but I left it up to you whether you were going to share that about yourself personally. But we were just talking about like the street cred that brings, that you really live that life, you live it and you embody it and you embrace it. So you have such a unique perspective, not only as a professional, who specializes in this, but also as a mom. Which is, that very deep, robust connection that gives you a real practical I think, lens to
Yes.
this.
Yes. Yes. I
Right?
remember writing behavior plans for kids and talking about them with parents. And I mean, just thinking like, well, if you do this, then you have to, the next step is you'll get this. Like it's just A plus B equals C. And um, it is just so humbling as a parent to realize that all the science and the research are great and they're helpful, but it doesn't always apply in day-to-day life so neatly, sometimes a little more complicated.
Yeah, it's not so linear, right?
Yep.
Which it's so funny. Humility was the word that really resonated with me, right? Having a humility to it, and looking back at the years that I was also writing behavior plans and making recommendations, and thinking that was arrogant.
I know. I know. I know.
Anyway, here we are, hopefully more evolved now.
Yeah, I hope. Still learning.
And still open to learning and still open to making mistakes and, staying committed to the process.
Yeah.
So Danielle, maybe something that we could do really quickly is talk about what educational psychologists do, because there's so many different types of psychologists. Like I'm a clinical psychologist. That's different than an educational psychologist. So could you help us understand what an ed psych does?
Yes. Yeah. So California allows school psychologists to they take a test, and they are regulated by the Board of Behavioral Sciences. And so once you pass this exam, then you can be a licensed educational psychologist, and you can do lots of different things: counseling, both individual and group counseling for kids. Obviously, a big portion is your assessments. So either doing private psychoeducational assessments where you're looking at how a child learns and what the impact is with their cognitive or processing abilities. And then sometimes parents disagree with school district assessments, and so they can request an individualized independent educational evaluation, IEE. And so you come in and you try to be neutral, as you know, and just really get a good whole picture of the child. But LEPs can also do advocacy. That's near and dear to my heart, obviously, helping parents navigate all the systems of support. And then some of them do a lot of contract work with districts that are short psychologists. And honestly, I think the thing that maybe is different about an educational psychologist is definitely less clinical, obviously. So, really our experiences typically are in schools. We understand the whole system of schools and how you navigate IEPs, all the acronyms.
Yes.
SSTs, PSS, it's a whole nother language, but that's about it.
Yeah. And this real focus on the educational system, this idea of really fully, because, I didn't understand going to school and getting my, becoming licensed as a clinical psych. I didn't really fully understand that the educational system and the role that psychologists can play in that system, specifically how maybe the impact of psychology is on learning or accessing a curriculum and this. So something that I find to be so helpful is when I'm talking or collaborating with my ed psych colleagues, they really give me a really good perspective of that culture and that the way that system works and what's reasonable in that system, right? And so that is important because we're talking about education. So
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I definitely think that it's one of those things where helping teachers and parents understand, if an intervention is effective, what does evidence-based mean? I think that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and typically an educational psych has just a little bit more of their hands in curriculum and understanding that side of education. But then also just how do you access mental health support in schools? I think so few people realize that is often the first place kids show signs. And so rarely do they get the help they need unless, first of all, schools, are funded and have the number and ratio of psychologists that they should have, but also just helping parents know, like, yeah, there is supposed to be a school psychologist, a counselor at every school, and kids can access mental health support at school. It's just, how do you get there?
Yeah, and that exists.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That even exists. And that learning, so much of learning is psychologically driven.
Yes.
So how important that is. No, that's awesome. You have such an amazing specialty. And this is something that, I feel the word inclusion really gets tossed and thrown about, right? And sometimes very loosely, sometimes very specifically. But the bottom line is, what exactly is inclusion? When we talk about inclusion, what exactly is that? And how do we actually see it practically implemented, in an ed setting, for example? So maybe we can even start there. What is inclusion?
Yeah, this is my favorite topic. So I'm so excited always to talk about it. And I think inclusion definitely does get misunderstood a lot. But for me, one of the biggest things, the simplest, distilled down idea of inclusion is just when you presume competence in all children, regardless of disability, race, socioeconomic status, and then you also offer them equal access and equitable, access to the education system. I think a lot of times education is very siloed, so everybody has their separate, I do special education, I do general education. These are my kids and those are your kids. And inclusion is really about equipping every teacher to teach every kid. And so, that to me is really important, that every child have that option from the beginning. A lot of times it's real categorical. So if you have this disability, honestly, with my son at age 3, it was, okay, he has, autism and Fragile X. We are going to put him in this self-contained program with all kids that are, similar eligibilities. And that is really, I think, just not setting the same expectations and goals for all kids. And so for me, I could talk about it in circles all day, but I think if you just presume competence for every child and let them show you what they're capable of, when you give the teacher the right supports, the support staff that is needed, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, go ahead, Danielle.
I think, to bring this to light personally, I think a lot of people think that even doctors and specialists in the medical system, they think they know a child based on, well, what do most kids with that diagnosis do, and what is their potential? And I'll never forget when my son was 9 months old, he was in all the therapies. We found out early, and so that was my life then. I was taking him to physical therapy, speech therapy, feeding therapy, and it was a fairly fresh and new diagnosis for me personally. And I asked his therapist, his physical therapist, we were doing work on trying to get him to crawl and walk. And just the mom in me said, do you think he'll ever be able to ride a bike? And she looked at me and she said, he's not going to be an Olympic athlete if that's what you're asking. And I just was devastated. I just kind of smiled and got through that session, but that was a really kind of pivotal moment for me. My husband and I decided at that point that we really wanted to be surrounded by people that believed in our son. And honestly, in retrospect, that was probably a dumb question for me to ask, but it's just the mom in you, right? That you just for whatever reason, that's what I was worried about.
Yep.
And so, you know, we went on and we went to a couple more sessions, and then she told me she didn't think he'd have the cognitive potential to ever learn how to climb stairs. And it just came so clear that she just didn't presume competence in him. She didn't think that, she saw his diagnosis and not the unique child that's there. And that's the thing that's so important to me, is you need to look at each child as unique. Their diagnosis is helpful, but it's not everything, and it shouldn't limit them. And so I have to say, I wish I had kept her email, sent her a video, because he's riding a bike and he's climbing stairs fine.
Right.
But, right, it's just, I do think now, like, what if we believed her? I mean, what if we really just at that point stopped? We stopped trying, we stopped expecting him to reach, you know, some of these goals and potential. I think he'd have limited opportunity. And I think that we do that a lot for kids. And it just, that's why, you know, I feel so fortunate and blessed that we're able to, I understand the educational system, we're able to get my son what he needs and to get him surrounded by a team of people that also believe in him. But I really feel passionate about doing that for every kid that I meet with disabilities, because I think when you get the right team around them and you have people that believe in them, they reach so much more potential than you know, people think is possible.
Yeah. And it's so hard, don't you think, Danielle, to say what the potential of someone is?
Yeah.
I mean, especially as a 3-year-old,
yes.
you know, to say, oh, he's 3.
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
yep.
and that in that moment, that there was something emotional happening for you.
Yes.
Right. You needed reassurance in some way, shape, or form in that moment, because you were worried about something.
Yep.
You know, and that's not unlike the experience of any parent for that matter. And, you know, hopefully we are surrounded by people who also share hope for, you know, in our children. Not saying that we want to just have rose-colored glasses and be, you know, and be completely disillusioned, but that we do want to give people a chance with the right opportunity to see, like, give them a moment.
Right.
You know, I don't know, maybe give them a few extra times there.
Exactly.
Let's see what can happen.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, and I do think you do walk this fine line of not, you know, of course, as a mom, I'm going to believe in him more than anyone, right? Like, you know, and I did think like, okay, well, maybe I am just too optimistic, and maybe I am wearing those rose-colored glasses. And so, but I kept plugging along, and then doing the work that I did, you know, at the charter school, building this inclusion program. You know, we would see kids that came into us and had all kinds of, you know, different disabilities, Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, you know, severe autism, ADHD. And when we got the right team in place, they all succeeded. Now, did they meet, you know, every grade level goal and expectation? No, but they all made much more progress. And so I started to think, okay, it's not just my mom bias, like there is something to inclusion. And so then when I worked at the Mind Institute, I met a wonderful human being, and also became a great friend, but Dr. Oliver at the Mind Institute, does some research on inclusion. And so I finally felt like, oh my gosh, this is validating what I've been thinking as a mom and a school psychologist, but not, you know, I'm not a researcher. And so she shared with me research that actually shows, compared to kids in contained classroom, they've taken some data and they see that kids not only, you know, do better, the kids with disabilities, they have increased language, even their IQ goes up, their behaviors improve because they have typically developing role models, so that, you know, they're seeing kids that are socializing in the way that, you know, is teaching them. But the kids without disabilities have positive outcomes too. They have more comfort around other kids with disabilities. Their test scores are not negatively affected. You know, I think we all know that the greatest way to learn something is when you teach someone else. So when you have mixed group kids, it really does help. So I think, you know, that was just so validating for me to see, like, oh yeah, this is actually playing out in research and in the real world. It's not just my personal experience. And that just made me really passionate and sure that, yep, this is the direction I want to go with my career. I want to build a career on how to do inclusion well, and how to get the right supports in place for kids.
Yeah. And it's, you know, when you do inclusion well, it sounds like there's thoughtfulness, attention, and planning, and some kind of measurement. I mean, in some way, shape, or form, right? But it's this idea of maybe even before we write someone off, have we exhausted,
you
know, what we know to be potentially helpful for this person, right? Whatever that is, right? And so, you know, to have someone with lenses like that, you know, to say, wait, there's so much we haven't tried yet. You know, let's try some more stuff. Let's throw it at the wall. And, you know, sometimes I think we can be really bad at predicting what's going to work. You know, I tend to be pleasantly surprised. So now I'm just like, let's have an open mind. Let's experiment. Let's be curious. Let's throw it at the wall. Maybe throw it at the wall again, and maybe again. And you know, look what we have. But yeah. And so Danielle, you come in and support these systems now because you're not with a district any longer because you're private.
Right.
So how do you support teams now? How does that look?
Yeah, so I think what you said is so true about, you know, you have to try a lot of options sometimes. And so often what I'll hear, because I feel like now in this role, I'm called in when inclusion isn't going well, per se. And so oftentimes, you know, with good intentions, I really don't think anyone goes into supporting a child and into special ed or general ed and without good intentions. You know, I think districts and people want to do the right thing for kids. But often the easiest thing to do is stick a one-on-one aid with a child and then put them in the classroom and just kind of hope for the best. And so what we know is that there are a lot of amazing, wonderful, well-trained aides that, you know, do great work, but oftentimes they are not people with a teacher credential or specialized training. And more importantly, they aren't given the time that they need to collaborate with the other educators. So I think, I'm not saying that an aide never works, but I think that what I see happen often is they're just stuck in there without training, and without the teacher that's leading that classroom feeling an accountability or responsibility for that child. It's just human nature when you see a child that has this other adult attached to them to think like, oh, they've got that. Like, I'm going to keep teaching these kids. And I think really inclusion works well when there's this really integrated team. So, you know, if you're going to have an aide, they're collaborating with that general ed teacher and special ed teacher at least once a week, where they're writing lesson plans that are universally designed. So, you know, that I can talk briefly about that. There is so much research on universal design for learning, but it's really about, if you design your lesson from the beginning with every kind of learner in mind, it really takes away the need to kind of retrofit. So universal design came from architecture and buildings, where we had to go and retrofit, you know, buildings to be wheelchair accessible. And so they applied that to education, and really they're talking about, okay, how are we going to engage the child? There's actually more than one way. It doesn't have to all be that we do a worksheet to learn these math facts. We can engage them by doing, you know, a store and setting up like a real life math scenario. But then beyond engagement, it's how do we give the child different ways to show what they've learned. So instead of just a multiple choice test to show if you know those math skills, can that child, do a video performance and demonstrate a math fact? Or can they make a slideshow? Can they, when you get creative about that design of the lesson and then the design of the way you test the child, it allows access for kids with differences in ability, in language, in physical, if they have physical disabilities. So I think that is a really critical piece for inclusion to go well, is when everybody's got training on UDL. And it's not just on the aide's shoulders, who typically has the least education, but I don't want to underestimate the power of a good aide. And then, research shows too that when you have a principal, a leader of a school who believes in inclusion, the child does better, even though they're far removed. It's kind of crazy. It's just that, kind of culture that you create in a school. And then it's the time that you dedicate to training, to giving your teachers the time they need to train, giving them the supports they need and the resources. Maybe they need access to different curriculums. Another one of my real favorite curriculums that's unique to autism is called Classroom Pivotal Response Training, CPRT. And you can Google that. I have to always mention Dr. Abendstamer at the Mind Institute. She created this with special education teachers. She's amazing, and has a lot of research behind it, that when you train general ed teachers, not even special ed, the students with autism in their class have a lot better outcomes. And this is a naturalistic kind of, it was adapted from PRT, which is just pivotal response training. And parents do that often with their children when they're young. But it's just kind of, I think, getting the right tools and resources in place. And then I'm always encouraging teams to collaborate more and not work in silos. That there's a lot of intersectionality in special education, and a child who has a disability might also they're a general ed student first. Our child English learners are a general ed student first. Every child is a general ed first, and I think we forget that often. And then the last research I'll share, or resource, Dan Habib, he's a filmmaker and he has done some great documentaries. So I always tell people to watch, including Samuel and Intelligent Lives. Those are two of my real favorites. I think you're familiar with him.
Yeah. It's so great. And I love this concept. Danielle. Every child is a gen ed student first.
Yeah.
I actually think that's forgotten.
Yes.
So we automatically kind of go into these silos, right? No. This student belongs in your class. These students belong in my class. And then when you visit me in my class, that student has a one-on-one aide, and then they sit in the back, and the aide, it always feels a little disjointed whenever I go and observe something like that. Versus kind of a more integrated kind of idea of including the student from the lesson plan. I mean, you're talking about thinking about every learner from the minute you set a lesson plan.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as you know, with the work you do, when children leave the education system, the world's not like that. I mean, they don't go out into the community and there's this section for kids, adults with disabilities, and I want them fully integrated, however that looks, with whatever support they might need, because that's the world that we're sending them off into.
Yeah. And it is that, in other interviews, we talk about this cliff, because I'm so focused on that transition from high school to adult living, that I see that as a cliff. And sometimes in these silos where we have really comprehensive supports, actually, those are the students that can struggle quite a bit because they've been so wrapped around without this idea of I need to transfer some agency to you now. Before you leave, we got to really think about that around 15, 16. We really got to think about empowering you and transferring what we've been doing to you now.
So
So I
true.
see that as, you know, as a struggle sometimes. But you know, as you come in, you've got such a great perspective here with inclusion, because you have the public school background, right? You've got a mom background. You now have specialized training from the Mind Institute, which is such like, what a wonderful resource by you. You know, you're here trying to hub teams. I'm sure you're providing resources. You just provided us 3 lovely resources, connecting people to those. When someone comes into you in an IEE situation, meaning, you know, they're needing a separate independent evaluation from you. Talk to us about how you approach that kind of assessment, and then how you might have inclusion in your mind with that kind of assessment.
Definitely. I think the number one thing that I start with is, what questions do you want answered? So I'm sure you've seen a million psych reports, and there's typically a style in these reports that we're trained to write. And what I realized over the 15 years that I wrote them, and then especially when I got my son's report, was often it doesn't have all the information that the parent really wants in a really easy to digest way. So for me, what's really important is that I make sure I have a clear idea of what the parent wants to know about their child. And so that's where we start, is what questions do you want answered with this assessment? What are you confused about? Or what do you want to know that maybe hasn't been looked at? Or what are you in disagreement with? That, you know, that sometimes happens. And like I said, I really do try to stay neutral. My job is to try to get the best picture of that child, and the most complete picture. So I feel, you know, again, just so in agreement with the Intelligent Lives documentary, that these tests we use are limited. You know, the traditional intelligence test can tell us a little bit about a child. It does not tell us everything. And there are so many limitations still with just equity in these tests, and the fact that, you know, they really, people use them to make some pretty bad decisions in education. And as you know, there's disproportionality. So we've got students that, Black and students of color are being placed not only in segregated settings more often, but then they're being disciplined, you know, more often than their peers. And a lot of that is just making sure that we're using the tests that we have really thoughtfully. I think that there is a purpose for the test, and I you know, believe that a good psychoeducational assessment includes a lot of standardized testing, but just as much of qualitative information and data, you know, interviews, observations, rating scales. You know, there's lots of ways to look at a child. And I think the number one thing I say to every assessment I do is strength-based. You know, we got to build from a place of strength rather than deficit. I feel like the whole IEP system is such a deficit-based system. And again, I think people have great intentions. I am so thrilled that we, you know, the federal government has a system for kids with disabilities and allows them in school now. But it is written, just the way it's designed is you're focusing on what kids aren't good at. And who wants to sit in a meeting for an hour and hear about all the things they're bad at? I feel like if we start with, okay, what are you good at? And then how can we help you compensate for the things that you do need help with? I'm not saying, you know, to ignore the deficits, but if you build from a place of strength, I really just think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. And it, you know, I think what is so helpful here, Danielle, is mindsets. This is kind of what you're talking about, right? Which is providing frameworks that include mindsets for things, whether that's like, you know, every child is a gen ed student first as an inclusive mindset, or that, you know, I'm going to do an assessment that's strength-based. It doesn't mean we ignore what's hard for someone, because we do need to nod to that, but that we say, what are you good at? Now, how do we use that then to compensate or build systems to support you with what's hard for you, or what you have to work really hard at? How can we ease some of that
Exactly.
load, for you? I see very, very clearly, this idea of easing pain points, or pressure points. And as a psychologist, parents often come to me, or adult clients come to me with a specific thing. There is a specific thing, sometimes it might not be well articulated because there's just a general sense of worry or unease, but to be able to be engaged in a formal process that allows parents to articulate and organize, or maybe organize their thinking in order to articulate, much like my adult clients, when I'm helping them advocate in their life, sometimes they know that there's something off, but they don't know what to call it. They don't have the words for it, and they don't know when to even advocate for it, So, in regards to kind of easing pain points or easing pressure points, you come in here to say, okay, something's not working. Right. Educationally, something's not working here. Right.
And you're right. I think I do hope that I can help parents articulate, what they want to know about their child and what they want to see for their child. I do think sometimes it's hard, this system is also so confusing and complex, and there's so many systems. So my hope would be that I not only see the possibility in every child as opposed to the deficits, but that I help them navigate all of these systems. And it's like, I always tell parents, this is another language you have to learn when you're in the world of special ed. There's so many acronyms. And it feels like a lot of parents say, they feel like there is a question they need to be asked or a service they need to ask for, but they don't know what it is. And it feels very opaque and hard to kind of see through. So helping them navigate that, I think, is really important. It does, even with my level of experience in the schools with my own son, it sometimes feels like a mountain you're climbing, where you have to call the insurance company, and then you have to, go through Alta and it's just so much bureaucracy, that I hope I can ease that pain of how to navigate the systems with a little more ease. And then also, it's really important to me to tie every intervention back to evidence-based practice. So as you know, we're in a time of, you can kind of find what you want on Google to say there's research supporting something. And that was really eye-opening for me at the Mind Institute, just realizing there is so much research out there, and we know what works, but it is hard to climb through that, mess of what is truth and what isn't. And so really helping parents find some reputable sites, and school and teachers too. I mean, they just are so burdened that they don't have time to research evidence-based practice for their students. They're 1 or 2 students on the spectrum. So my hope is to kind of give them some quick and easy resources that we know works. You have such limited time in special education. I feel like the number of minutes a kid gets each week or month, that I think we should do what we know works and really try to be efficient with that intervention.
Yeah. And that's what it sounds like. You're closing that gap, because when there is a lot of information becomes devalued. Right. Like if there's so much of it and you don't have the time to sort through it, then you don't. So here you are also kind of closing the gap for parents to say, hey, we really tried to capture comprehensively who your kiddo is. Now, based on that, and based on the systems that we know about and are at play, here's how we can kind of close some of those gaps with things that we know to work, right? Things that we know have been shown to work. And so we want to give those things a try. Kind of back to, kind of full circle to when we first started talking, which is how can we exhaust the things? How can we exhaust things before we give up on them?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
You know, which is so great. So, you know, Danielle, what do you hope? And you know, I know this is a very loose question, but what do you hope happens, you know, for your client as an outcome? And I know that you do, you know, you wear different hats. You know, you assess, you consult, and you're also a therapist. I mean, you also provide counseling to students and clients. So you can answer this in whatever way you want then, but you know, anyone that comes into contact with you professionally, what do you hope happens for that client or that family?
I think that, regardless of which hat I'm wearing, I think that the number one thing would be what I started with, where you presume competence for this child. You know, I'll have, I do quite a bit of counseling and CBT work for children with anxiety and or autism. And sometimes, you know, it's gotten pretty bad to the point where they can't leave the house, or they can't, you know, ever go near outside because the kid has such a fear of bees. And I really think, regardless if I'm testing or doing counseling or consulting, I want people to believe that we can make progress, that their child can learn. We can assume that they are competent and they'll get there. They just don't have the supports they need right now. And so that's it. Presume competence and find the supports they need, or teach them the skills, you know, the toolbox. What tools do we need to add to that toolbox?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and you talk about CBT, and, you know, CBT is such an interesting cognitive behavioral therapy for, you know, so we'll just make sure that people understand what CBT, no, it's okay. But you know, that it's a very specific methodology when it comes to therapy. I don't want to derail us too much, but maybe what you can do is just kind of talk about just theoretically the idea of CBT, or how it works.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the things that is encouraging, I would say, is anxiety in kids is like the number one social emotional concern. I saw that in the schools. It plays out in the research. Anxiety is really common in children. And people can feel really overwhelmed, like I said, and it can really affect family systems. But the great news is that cognitive behavioral therapy has really good evidence behind it. So although anxiety is the most common, it's also one of the most easy to treat issues when, you know, the kid gets what they need. And so cognitive behavioral therapy is really first kind of teaching them to identify the signs and the clues that their body gives. So, you know, those somatic complaints, I have butterflies in my stomach. I might have, you know, my heart's beating real fast. And then teaching them about their thoughts, you know, that their thoughts actually are leading to this anxiety. Not necessarily the situation. It's not really the bees. It's that what do you think is going to happen if you get stung by a bee? And so teaching, you know, kids how to kind of check the evidence, and really, you know, we all get caught in thinking traps. I tell kids, it happens to adults too.
Yes.
And how do we challenge that, you know, and then replace it with obviously a more realistic or coping thought. And then the last piece of CBT that's really critical, and as you know, is exposures. It's going right to whatever makes them anxious and systematically practicing up to the point where they can get there. So, you know, being around a bee, and that's what I tell parents is like, whatever their anxieties are, we're going to go directly towards it. You know, it'll be a systematic process, and we will slowly teach them all of the cognitive skills. But then behaviorally, we are going to do exposures, and I'm going to give them the tools so they can face them. And just like with anything, I assume that all kids can get there with the right supports. And some kids just need a lot more repetition than others. But I've found such great success with it. So
yes. And you know, the exposure piece is, I think, what a lot of therapists miss in CBT. Right. We spend a lot of time on how the body feels and what the thinking is, and our thinking traps, and how we can be irrational and all of that stuff. But then there's not any guidance with an actual exposure that's graded, systematic, and that in the meantime, we've also been teaching coping skills so that we can use those in exposure. Right. So it's such a lovely, it's a lovely therapeutic model. I don't think it's great for all kids, but for many that can think about, can look at think about their thoughts or reflect on their thoughts, can maybe pair their body signals to thinking, to pull up strategies. Man, it is an incredible model, therapeutic model.
And I'm glad you said that it might not be the best fit for all kids. I have definitely noticed that there are some adaptations that need to happen if depending on your language ability and then just the autism piece. But the Mind Institute also, had some good studies on this, on how to adapt. And a lot of it is, you're going to focus more on the B.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do as much of the cognitive piece depending on language. And then really for me, what I found, and this too, is getting into that child's interest. Whatever their enthusiasm is, that character becomes who we do the exposure with. We kind of externalize it. And so I just would encourage parents that if they do have a child who has multiple diagnoses, there are ways to access, I have heard people say that certain kids can't benefit from talk therapy or counseling. And I do think that's a little bit, again, of not presuming competence. And if you find the right therapist that can make some adaptations and really take that time to build rapport, I've learned so much about Pokemon and video games and things that I just, I had to do it because that was the only way I was going to get in. So. Oh
yeah. So much of my Star Wars education has come from my clients. So I'm a lover of Star Wars anyway, but
that's awesome.
I'm like, oh, I didn't know there were 3 codes of Jedis. And I was like, but it's been fascinating. And, maybe here, Danielle, the key here is a therapist who not only presumes competence, but is creative, right?
Yes.
It's the ability to be like, okay, well, I mean, it's not going to work that way. But man, it could work this way. And really working with a parent on expectations, of the fact that might take a little longer.
Totally.
I mean, with a lot of my clients, it does. We need more repetitions. We need more exposure. We need more frequent, less time, just more frequently. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to play that, but I love that it's really meeting the client where they are. And, back to, sorry, I derailed us with CBT just because that was fun.
It's okay.
But, going back to inclusion and talking about individualization, do you ever feel like there's a time where inclusion may not be appropriate for a student? Like how might you make some of those determinations, or do you even see that?
The thing about an IEP is it is individualized. And I have met teams, and I actually have some close friends that just, for their child, that's not the picture they have. And so for me, I completely respect that. And my opinion and philosophy is that every child should have the option. And if the team and the parents, most importantly, feel like inclusion just isn't the vision they have for their child, I completely respect that. I think the problem is I see so many kids don't even get that option at a real young age. We start placing them in separate settings really young. And like I said, I have an issue with the equity and access as well, because a lot of times it's our families that are either, have disproportionate identification, and then also placements that don't have the advocacy or, supports to know that they could ask for an inclusive placement. Because oftentimes what happens is a kid, is young and 3 years old and they say, yeah, this categorical program, every kid goes to this school, but it's not in your neighborhood, so we'll bus you for free. And maybe that, kid wants to be part of their neighborhood community and walk to school with their brother or sister. And so to me, I just think they should have that option, and then that they should do it well. And if that doesn't work, I completely support, people, it needs to be individualized. Every child is unique and different.
Yeah. Yeah. And you go back to family systems, right? Like what is going to work best for that family? How does that work in that family system? That is so critical to think about as we're thinking about truly individualizing, because that's their world, their family is where they go home to, and the one that gives them their primary support. So that is so important. So Danielle, how do people typically access your service? I know that we just spoke about 3 different ways, or 3 kind of different main hats that you wear. So maybe we can break down how people might access your service based on those services themselves.
Yes. Yeah. So for counseling, I'm a small private practice, so I do private pay and super bills. A lot of my clients are able to get reimbursed through their insurance with a super bill, which is great. And then the IEEs, when you get an independent evaluation, are actually funded by the district. So a parent has to, make a request and give the school an opportunity to do an assessment. And if for whatever reason they disagree, they need to put in writing to the district and then get permission. And so that's how that works. And then the advocacy and consulting, people find me, it's as a lot of networking and friends of friends. But I also am really fortunate. I get to I do some volunteer work at the Mind Institute and do this program called Family Navigator. And so we are parents, helping parents. We coach them after their diagnosis. So parents that get a new autism diagnosis are offered to participate in this program, where we have a whole library of resources that the Mind Institute developed, YouTube videos, infographics, PowerPoints, all about just the world of autism and all the different facets. And so I love doing that, because it reminds me of those early days with my son. And I was at the point where I didn't really want to go to a support group. I wasn't ready for something like that yet, but it was my friends talking one-on-one to people who had been through it that was really helpful. So I love this design.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe what we can do is I'll talk to you, and we can put the info for the links in the description below for people to reach out to that program if they feel like could be helpful.
Yeah.
So, I always ask other psychologists this question because I always feel like we always learn something new, especially as we go into private practice. But like, what's something you've learned, being an ed psych, that you might not have learned otherwise in this journey?
Yeah, it's, I think people told me when I was starting my private practice, like, did you take any business classes in college? And I was like, no. So that has been a very steep learning curve for me, just the business side of things, and QuickBooks and, all of that jazz. So that's been very steep learning curve. A lot of the other work, I feel like I can, I'm sorry, my son turned on the TV.
That's okay.
I feel like I am doing what I was doing in the schools, but I have more time to do it, which is such a treat. Doing the counseling and having a full hour with a kid in the schools, man, it is so hard to have that kind of time. There's just so much coming in that I would be lucky to get 30 minutes. It was usually 15-minute check-ins. So that has been a very nice side of the educational psychologist.
That's awesome. Okay. All right. So then I also always end my interviews with this question, which is, I think I might know, but I'll let you elaborate, which is if you could only choose one skill to empower a child or an individual with, what would it be and why?
I'm gonna say, you know what I'm gonna say, presume competence. Yeah, I just keep coming back to my son and so many kids I've seen where I just never would have thought that it was so powerful to do that for a child. That really, but I mean, I'm not surprised. You know, as a psychologist, you're right. So much of life and our outcomes are about our mindset, and so. You know, I just think that in the disability world, a lot of people make these assumptions, you know, and they make predictions. And doctors, I think, are frequently asked to make predictions.
Yes.
But I just finished reading a book called Disability Visibility, and it's a collection of essays. I think Alice Wong put it together, but it's all different people with disabilities and their experiences. And to me, what I read over and over is what gifts they bring to the world, you know, and that if we presume competence and we let these people with disabilities lead, you know, companies and schools and systems, we gain so much. And I just think representation matters so much. And they can't be represented if we don't presume that they can do things just like the rest of us, just with different support. So that's definitely my one thing I would love to empower every person with.
Yeah, every person with, right? Because I mean, I think about just the feeling that you have when you're with someone who presumes your competence.
Yeah.
Like
you rise.
Yeah, it's pretty profound versus I really don't believe that you can do anything. So good luck. I don't mean to be that flippant, but it has this feeling of, you know, and man, I mean, even parents period.
Yep.
Right. If you can presume competence in your child, adolescent, teen, adult child, right? Yeah. Imagine what happens, you know, even in like falling down and getting back up and not having to protect kids all the time and letting them have some experiences, you know. In so many of these interviews, we talk a lot about the dignity of risk. And how important that is even for adolescents and adults, because we're so worried, you know, we're anxious about our kids being hurt and making mistakes, and we're worried about that. And we all understand that as parents because of what we want for our children. But we do also need to allow that if we presume competence and we're like, you're fine, you're good, like, you know, that mishap, that mistake, that bump, that bruise, that's okay. You're good. You're going to be fine, you know? And so it's really awesome that is your number one thing. It's so lovely. Well, Danielle, how do people get a hold of you? Like I said, I will put your information in the description, but maybe you can let people know what's like the best way to get a hold of you.
You know, I will say moderately active on Twitter and Instagram, but every summer I take a break, a screen break. So I'm taking my little summer break, but I usually I find a lot of valuable education resources on Twitter. And so I follow a bunch of inclusionists, we call ourselves, and learn a lot from that. And so my Twitter handle, I think, is @inclusive psych. And then Instagram, that's Twitter. Instagram is @inclusively minded. And Instagram is becoming another place where I'm learning lots of resources and following lots of like-minded people. So
Great. And your website, right? Inclusively-minded.com.
That's right.
You can also get a hold of you as well. So I'll direct people over there. Thank you so much for spending some time with me and talking about inclusion. I love it.
Thank you for the opportunity and the time. I'm so excited about it.
Thanks, Danielle. Hey, thanks for watching. If you're interested in finding out more about Danielle, her information is in the description below. I've also provided a link to my website where I provide additional insights and impressions of this interview. If you got any value from this interview, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Doing so helps to get this information to others just like you. If there's a topic or a program that you want to know more about, please leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.